Okay, today we're going to be solving quadratics using the factoring method. So the first thing we're going to address is the zero product property, and that says if you multiply two numbers together, your end final answer is 0, which means that one of your numbers, either A or B, has to have a value of 0 because any number times 0 is equal to 0. So this is going to come into play for our factoring method. So if you don't know how to factor because you struggled with that in Unit 6, this will be a good review for you. And if you did factoring and you were very confident and rocked it in Unit 6, then this is just going to add one more step to that. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to look at how do I solve a quadratic by factoring. So the steps are that you're going to rearrange your equation to equal f of x equals or y equals. So you're just going to get all of your trinomial terms onto the same side of the equals, and then we're going to replace f of x or y with 0, just like we did with the graphing method. We're going to kind of combine both of these into one step, and we're just going to go straight to replacing y with 0. So all of our trinomial terms will be on one side of the equals, and a 0 will be on the other side of the equals. Then we're going to factor the trinomial and set each factor equal to 0. So remember, your factors are those terms that are inside our parentheses that we find when we factor. It's the terms that make our rows and columns. We're going to set that equal to 0 because one of those has to be a 0 according if our product is going to be a 0. And then we're going to write and solve for our x values. And remember from yesterday, we can either get one solution, two solutions for x, or we can end up with no real solutions. And that is based off on how many x intercepts we have. So here's just another illustration of the zero product property, kind of illustrating visually what we're going to do with once we get our factors or those terms in the parentheses, what we're going to do with them from there. So we're going to start on the back with our first example. And I'm going to solve factoring when our a coefficient is equal to 1. So I have x squared plus 18 equals 9x. So the first thing I want to do is I want to move my 9x over so that I have x squared minus 9x plus 18. So I'm going to go ahead and put those terms in order like I need them to be for my trinomial. And that's going to be equal to y. And remember, we're just going to go ahead and replace y with 0. So that really is our y that we're replacing with 0 because when we are finding x-intercepts, the y value is always 0. That's why we're going to go ahead and skip to that step right there. And so now I have x squared minus 9x plus 18, and this is my trinomial that I am now going to factor. So now I'm going to use my x to factor, so I need to multiply my a and c coefficient. So 1 times 18 is 18. And I need to fill in my b coefficient in the bottom of my x, and that's a negative 9. And so now I need to think of factors that multiply to 18 but add to negative 9. So I'm going to use my calculator. So remember, we go to y equals, and we type in 18 divided by x, and we hit second graph. And now I'm going to look at all of my factors. So 1 and 18 is not going to add to negative 9. 2 and 9 will not work, but 3 and 6 will. So now I need to figure out, do they need to be negative or positive? And they both need to be negative, and I can check that. Negative 3 times negative 6 does equal 18. Negative 3 plus negative 6 does add up to a sum of negative 9. So I have my x terms. So remember, we're going to fill in our box now. So you want to make sure you're also using a box to factor. So our lead term of our trinomial is going to go in the top left box, and our constant is going to go in the bottom right box. And now we're going to fill in our diagonal boxes with the numbers that we got from our x that filled in the left and right side of our x. And those terms have to add up to a negative 9x. So if I just have negative 3 and negative 6 in those diagonal boxes, those aren't going to be a like term with negative 9x, so I have to add an x to both of these terms. And now I'm going to fill in my row terms and my column terms. So I'm going to start here. The common factor of x squared and x is x. And now I'm going to use my multiplication skills. X times x is going to fill in the box for x squared. X times what is going to fill in the box for negative 3x? And that is going to be negative 3. what times x is going to fill in the box for negative 6x? And that should be negative 6. And now I'm going to check my multiplication. Does negative 6 times negative 3 make a positive 18? And it does. So my factors for my trinomial is x minus 3 times x minus 6. That will get me the trinomial x squared minus 9x plus 18. All of this was a review of factoring. So now we're going to take our factors and we are going to add one more step. So I'm going to take my factors of x minus 3 and I'm going to set them equal to 0. Because if I'm multiplying and my end answer is 0, one of these numbers has to be 0. So I'm going to set it equals 0. Well, what would the value of x be if I take away 3 and my answer is 0? And the answer is going to be 3. So x could have a value of 3. But what if this number is not the 0 number? What if this parentheses, this factor, is equal to 0? So I would have x minus 6 equals 0. And so now I have to think, what would the value of x be? So when I take away 6, I get a final answer of 0. And the answer is x would have a value of 6. So my solutions for my quadratic equation could be that x is either 3 or x is 6. So x could have two different values. So now I want to review what we did yesterday when we talked about the graphing method. And so I'm going to type in my trinomial. I'm going to go to y equals, and I'm going to clear out what I had. I'm going to type in x squared minus 9x plus 18. And I'm going to hit graph, because when I look at the graph in my quadratic, I should be able to tell if it has two solutions, if it has one solution, or if it has no solution. And so I'm looking at how many x-intercepts it has. It crosses the x-axis, therefore there are two real solutions because I have two x-intercepts. So I have two zeros, I have two roots. And if you check our answers, we did get two answers. And if I look closely at my graph, I can see it does cross at 3 and at 6. And notice what my solutions were. X is equal to 3 and x is equal to 6. So using your graphing calculator can help you check your work. Now, will the graphing calculator always be able to give you the exact answers for x? No, but what it will help you do is it will help you tell you how many answers you should get when you factor, which is going to be a very nice piece of information to have. So now we're going to factor the next one. We've got x squared minus 25 equals 0. So again, I notice that I'm missing an x term. So if I don't see an x term in algebra, that is telling you there are 0 x's. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in so I have a trinomial. And I don't have to move any of my terms because I have a 0 on one side. So now I'm ready to start factoring the trinomial x squared plus 0x minus 25. So now I want to fill in my x. So I have to multiply my a and c coefficient, which is going to be negative 25. And b coefficient is going to be 0. So now I want to think of terms that add up to 0 but have to multiply to a negative 25. Well, if they add to 0, I know that one has to be negative and one has to be positive, and they have to be the same number. So if I'm needing help in my calculator, I can always put in negative 25 divided by x and go to my calculator, and I'm looking for the same x and y number. Oh, there they are, 5 and negative 5. And so now I'm going to fill in my table, my boxes. So I'm going to fill in my lead term with x squared. I'm going to fill in my constant, which is negative 25. It's going to go in the bottom right box, so negative 25. And now my diagonal boxes are going to be filled in by the numbers that I got from the left and right side of my x, and those have to add together to create the middle term of my trinomial. So in one box I'm going to have negative 5x and positive 5x, and I have to add the x when I write them in my boxes because my middle term is an x term. And so now I'm going to fill in, so the common factor between x squared and negative 5x is x, and now I use multiplication to help me fill in the rest of my rows and columns. X times what is going to fill in x squared? That would be x. X times what is going to fill in the box for negative 5x? That would be negative 5. What times x is going to fill in the box for 5x? That would be positive 5, and check my multiplication again. 5 times negative 5 does fill in the box for negative 25. So now I know that my factors are the terms that make my rows and columns, so that would be x minus 5 and x plus 5. And so now I'm going to use my two factors to solve for the values of x, or value of x. It could be 1, it could be 2. So I'm going to set x minus 5 equal to 0. So x minus 5 equal to 0. So now I have to think, what value of x, when I take away 5, is going to be equal to 0? And that means x has a value of 5. So now we're going to take our other factor, so x plus 5, and set that equal to 0, because it could be that this factor has a value of 0. So I think the value of x, when I add 5 and get a final answer of 0, x has to have a value of negative 5. And so now I know that my solutions to my quadratic are when x has a value of 5 or when x has a value of negative 5. And so now I'm going to use my calculator to check. So I'm going to clear my calculator. I'm going to go to y equals, and I'm going to type in my quadratic, x squared plus 0x. Now you could leave out the 0x term if you wanted, but if I put it in there, it's not going to hurt anything. And I'm going to hit graph because I want to make sure I'm supposed to get two solutions, which means it should cross the x-axis twice. Twice, so I know I have two solutions. And now I can look at my graph and I can see, does it cross at negative 5 and 5 or close to it? And it does appear to cross at negative 5 and positive 5 on the x-axis. So I know I'm headed in the right direction.